Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the horizon and watched the stars drift past the viewport. He had been in space for 15 years, and the sight still made him smile. Out here among the endless black and the distant lights, humanity had found its place. Earth and her 73 colonies stretched across this section of the galaxy like pearls on a string. It was a good time to be alive. "Captain, we're approaching Epsilon 9 station," said Commander Kate Sullivan from her position at the tactical console. Her voice was steady and professional as always. Kate had served with Jake for 8 years and he trusted her completely. "Good. Reduce speed to docking velocity. Let's not spook our new friends on their first meeting." Jake straightened his uniform and took a breath. Today was important. Today, humanity would meet the Valtre Collective for the first time. Dr. Lisa Grant walked onto the bridge carrying a data pad. She was the ship's chief xenobiologist and had spent the last 3 months studying everything known about the Valtre. It wasn't much. The insectoid species controlled over 200 worlds in the outer sectors, and they rarely spoke with other races. "Nervous?" Jake asked her. Lisa shook her head. "Excited. The Valtre are one of the oldest spacefaring species in the galaxy. If we can establish trade with them, it would be huge for the colonies." "If they want to trade?" Kate said quietly. "The reports say they're not exactly friendly." "They agreed to meet us," Jake replied. "That's a start." The horizon glided into position near the massive space station. Epsilon 9 was neutral ground, a place where different species could meet without entering each other's territory. The station was old, built by a race that had disappeared centuries ago, but it still served its purpose. Jake led the diplomatic team through the airlock and into the station's main conference hall. The room was large and circular, with a high ceiling that made voices echo. Waiting for them were the Valtre. They stood nearly 7 feet tall with hard black shells that gleamed under the station's lights. Their bodies were segmented and 4 arms extended from their torsos. Their heads were triangular, with multiple eyes that seemed to look in all directions at once. Sharp mandibles clicked together as they breathed. The lead Valtre stepped forward. "I am Commander Zekthor of the Valtre Collective." "You are the humans?" "Yes," Jake said, extending his hand in greeting. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison. This is Dr. Lisa Grant and Commander Kate Sullivan. We're honored to meet you." Zekthor looked at Jake's outstretched hand but did not take it. "We do not understand this gesture. Explain." "It's a handshake," Lisa said quickly. "A sign of friendship and respect in human culture." "Friendship," Zekthor repeated. The word sounded strange coming from his translator. "The Valtre do not have friends. We have assets and obstacles." "Which are you?" Jake lowered his hand slowly. "We hope to be trading partners. Humanity has resources that might interest the collective. We also seek knowledge and cultural exchange." "Cultural exchange." Zekthor clicked his mandibles in what might have been laughter. "Your species is young. You have been in space for less than 300 years. What culture could you possibly offer us?" Kate's jaw tightened, but Jake placed a hand on her shoulder. "We may be young, but we're eager to learn. Our colonies produce agricultural products, rare minerals, and advanced medical technology. We believe there's room for mutual benefit." The meeting continued for 2 hours. Zekthor and his delegation listened to the human proposals with what seemed like boredom. They asked few questions and showed little interest in anything Jake's team presented. When the meeting ended, Zekthor simply turned and walked away without another word. "Well, that was cold," Kate said as they returned to the horizon. "They're evaluating us," Lisa said. "Testing to see if we're worth their time." "Did you see how they looked at us?" Kate asked. "Like we were insects." "We need to be patient," Jake replied. "First contact is always difficult. Give them time." Back on Earth, Admiral Paul Henderson reviewed the reports from Epsilon 9 in his office at Colonial Defense Headquarters. He was a tall man with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He had commanded fleets during the Unity Wars decades ago, and knew better than most what humanity was capable of when pushed. "They think we're weak," he said to Senator Daniel Brooks, who sat across from him. Daniel was a politician, but he was also a veteran. He understood military matters better than most civilians. "Is that a problem?" "It could be. The Valtre have a reputation. They respect strength. If they see us as easy targets, we're not at war with them, Paul. One diplomatic meeting doesn't mean anything. I hope you're right." Paul closed the report file. "But I'm increasing patrols in the outer colonies anyway, just to be safe. The council won't like that. They'll say you're being paranoid. The council doesn't have to like it. My job is to keep our people safe. 3 weeks passed. The Horizon completed 2 more meetings with the Valtre delegation. Each time, Zekthor and his people remained distant and dismissive. They agreed to limited trade in basic goods but showed no interest in deeper cooperation. Jake found it frustrating, but he kept trying. Humanity had worked hard to build relationships with other alien species. The Draxi, the Kalish, even the reclusive Nomari had all eventually warmed to human diplomacy. The Valtrek would come around eventually, or so he thought. On the 4th meeting, Zekthor's attitude had changed. He seemed more interested, asking questions about human colonies and their defenses. Jake, thinking this was progress, answered honestly. Humanity's military was small compared to most spacefaring nations. They focused on trade and exploration, not conquest. So your colonies have limited defense forces? Zekthor asked. We have patrol ships and planetary defense systems, Jake replied, but we prefer to resolve conflicts through negotiation. War is expensive and destructive. Trade benefits everyone. Trade. Zekthor made that clicking sound again. You truly believe this? Of course. It's worked well for us so far. After that meeting, the Valtrek stopped responding to human communications. Weeks went by with no word. Jake sent messages requesting another meeting, but they all went unanswered. Maybe we offended them somehow, Lisa suggested. Or maybe they're just done with us, Kate said. Some species don't want anything to do with others. We should accept that and move on. Jake wasn't so sure, but there was nothing he could do. The Horizon was reassigned to other duties, and the Valtrek question was put aside. Life continued as normal across human space. On New Portland, the largest outer colony, Governor Amy Peterson oversaw the Harvest Festival. 8 million people called New Portland home, and the colony was thriving. New farms were producing record yields, and the terraforming was ahead of schedule. In another 20 years, New Portland would be as comfortable as Earth itself. Lieutenant Chris Bailey flew patrol routes around the colony, his fighter slicing through the upper atmosphere. It was boring work, but someone had to do it. Pirates occasionally tried their luck in the outer colonies, and smugglers loved the less monitored trade routes. Chris checked his scanner display. Nothing unusual, just the normal traffic of cargo ships and passenger transports. He yawned and thought about the date he had planned for tonight. Sarah, a botanist from the southern continent, had finally agreed to have dinner with him. He never made it to that dinner. The Valtrek fleet entered New Portland's system without warning. 200 warships appeared at the edge of sensor range and began advancing on the colony. Chris saw them on his display and couldn't believe what he was seeing. This is Fighter 7 to Colonial Defense. I have multiple contacts inbound. Repeat, multiple contacts. They're not responding to hails. The response from headquarters was immediate. All fighters return to base. Planetary shields to maximum. This is not a drill. Chris pushed his fighter to full speed, racing back toward the colony. Behind him, the Valtrek fleet continued its approach. He could see them now. Dark shapes against the stars, growing larger with each passing second. New Portland's defense fleet moved to intercept. 12 patrol ships and 3 frigates against 200 Valtrek warships. It wasn't even close to a fair fight. Governor Amy Peterson stood in the emergency command center and watched the tactical display with growing horror. Get me Earth now. Communications are jammed, Governor. We can't get a signal out. Then send a courier ship. Jump it out of the system immediately. Earth needs to know what's happening. The first Valtrek shots hit New Portland's shields. The entire planet shook from the impact. Amy gripped the console and made a decision. Begin emergency evacuation. Get as many people off the surface as possible. But there wasn't enough time. There would never be enough time. The Valtrek bombardment of New Portland lasted 6 hours. From orbit, their warships fired weapons that tore through the planetary shields like paper. The defense fleet fought back with everything they had, but it wasn't enough. One by one, the human ships were destroyed. Chris Bailey's fighter was hit during the 3rd hour. His left engine exploded, sending his craft spinning toward the surface. He managed to eject before impact, his emergency pod crashing in the ruins of what had been downtown New Portland. When he crawled out of the wreckage, the city was burning. Buildings that had stood for 50 years were reduced to rubble. The streets were filled with debris and bodies. Chris stumbled through the destruction, trying to find survivors. He could hear screaming in the distance, but every time he got close, the sounds would stop. The Valtre weren't just bombing the cities. They were landing ground forces, hunting down anyone who tried to hide. Chris saw them moving through the streets, their black shells reflecting the flames. They killed everyone they found. No prisoners. No mercy. He found a working communicator in a destroyed shop and tried to call for help. The channels were full of desperate voices. Other colonies were under attack too. Riverside Station, New Boston, Port Victoria. 12 human colonies in total, all hit at the same time. At the evacuation center near the spaceport, Governor Amy Peterson worked frantically to get people onto the transport ships. Thousands had made it to the shuttles, but millions more were still trapped in the cities. The Valtre were moving closer, and she knew time was running out. "Governor, we need to leave now," her security chief said. "The last transport is ready." "Not yet. There are still people coming. Governor, please." Amy looked at the crowd still rushing toward the spaceport. So many faces, so many families. She thought about her own children, safe on Earth, and felt grateful they weren't here to see this. A Valtre warship appeared in the sky above them, its weapons charging. Amy knew what was coming. Get everyone on the ships, go, now. She pushed her security chief toward the nearest transport. "That's an order." The transport lifted off just as the Valtre opened fire. Amy Peterson died protecting the evacuation, along with 3,000 others who didn't make it aboard. Chris Bailey watched the transport ships escape into orbit. At least some people would survive. He hid in the ruins and waited for the Valtre to pass. His fighter's emergency recorder was still working, capturing everything. If he could stay alive long enough, he could get this evidence to Earth. The bombardment continued for 3 more hours. When it finally stopped, New Portland was silent. 8 million people had lived on the colony. Now less than 50,000 remained, scattered and hiding. Then the Valtre did something worse. They released biological weapons into the atmosphere. Chris watched from his hiding spot as strange clouds spread across the sky. The clouds were green and moved against the wind like they were alive. Anyone caught in the clouds died within minutes. Chris saw it happen to a group of survivors who were trying to reach a shelter. They were running one moment, then they collapsed, their bodies convulsing as the biological agent attacked them. It was designed to target human DNA specifically. Nothing else was affected, just humans. Chris sealed his flight suit and activated its air supply. He had maybe 6 hours of oxygen. After that, he would have to breathe the poisoned air and die like everyone else. Across human space, the other colonies were suffering the same fate. The Valtre attacked with overwhelming force, destroying defense fleets and bombarding cities. Then came the biological weapons, turning entire planets into death traps. The few survivors sent out desperate messages before communications were cut off. The messages painted a picture of calculated genocide. The Valtre weren't trying to conquer these worlds. They were trying to erase humanity from them completely. On Earth, Admiral Paul Henderson received the first reports in his office at 3 in the morning. A courier ship had jumped into the system, badly damaged, carrying refugees from New Portland. The stories they told made his blood run cold. He immediately contacted Senator Daniel Brooks and the other members of the Colonial Council. By dawn, they were gathered in the emergency command center, watching the scattered video feeds that had made it through. 12 colonies, Paul said, his voice hard. Coordinated strikes. They knew exactly where to hit and when. This wasn't a random attack. They planned this. "How many casualties?" Daniel asked, though he already feared the answer. Preliminary estimates put it at 8 million dead, maybe more. The biological weapons make it hard to get accurate counts. The room fell silent. 8 million people. Gone in a single day. They declared war on us? One of the council members asked. No declaration. No warning. They just attacked. Paul pulled up a new video file. And they sent us this. The screen filled with the image of Commander Zekthor. Behind him, New Portland burned. "Humans," Zekthor said, his mandibles clicking. "Your species is weak. Your colonies are undefended. Your people die easily. The Valtre Collective claims these worlds now. You will surrender all remaining territories to us, or we will destroy them as we destroyed these. You have 1 week to comply." The message ended. Zekthor's image was replaced by scenes of destruction. Human cities burning, bodies in the streets, children crying for parents who would never answer. Paul Henderson had seen war before. He had fought in the Unity Wars when humanity nearly destroyed itself. He had seen cities burn and millions die. But that was different. Those were human enemies, human conflicts. This was something else entirely. "They think we'll surrender," Daniel said quietly. "They think we're weak," Paul replied. "They met our diplomats, saw our small defense fleets, and decided we were easy prey." "Are we?" Paul turned to look at the senator. "No, we're not." The Colonial Council met for 18 hours straight. Reports kept coming in as more survivors reached safe zones. The numbers got worse with each update. Some colonies had been completely wiped out. Others had small groups of survivors hiding in bunkers and caves waiting for rescue. Chris Bailey was one of the lucky ones. A stealth reconnaissance ship found him on the 4th day, still alive in his sealed flight suit. They extracted him and 24 other survivors, then jumped out of the system before the Valtre noticed. On the ship, Chris handed over his flight recorder to the intelligence officer. "It's all there. Everything they did. Make sure people see it." The officer looked at the recorder, then at Chris. "We will. I promise you that." When the refugee ships reached Earth, the planet was already mobilizing. The news of the attacks had spread across every human world. The reaction was immediate and unified. Grief turned to rage. Fear turned to determination. In the streets of Earth's major cities, millions gathered in silence. Memorial services were held in every town and colony. Flags flew at half-staff. But beneath the mourning, something else was building. Something dangerous. Jake Morrison watched the footage from New Portland and felt something break inside him. He had met with Zakthor. He had answered the Valtre's questions honestly, trying to build trust. And all along they had been planning this. Lisa Grant sat beside him in the observation room, tears running down her face. "I convinced you to keep trying with them. I said they would come around. This is my fault." "No," Jake said. "This is their fault. Only theirs." Kate Sullivan entered the room carrying orders. "We've been reassigned. The Horizon is being refitted for military operations. We deploy in 2 weeks." "Good," Jake said. "I want to be part of what comes next." "What comes next?" Lisa asked. Kate's expression was grim. "War, real war. The kind humanity hasn't fought in 100 years. The Colonial Council's decision was unanimous. Every member voted the same way. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, no surrender. The Valtre had made their choice when they attacked defenseless colonies and murdered 8 million people. Now humanity would make theirs. Senator Daniel Brooks addressed the council after the vote. "We tried peace. We offered friendship. They answered with genocide, so be it. Let them learn what happens when you make humans angry." Admiral Henderson was given complete authority over all military operations. His first act was to recall every warship in the fleet to Earth. His second was to contact Dr. Alan Foster at the Advanced Weapons Division. "Alan, I need you to dust off Project Reckoning. All of it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Paul, those weapons were banned. We agreed never to use them again after the Unity Wars. The Valtre broke the rules first. We're just going to finish what they started." "Are you sure about this? They killed 8 million of our people and laughed about it." "Yes, I'm sure." Deep in the mountains of Earth and facilities that hadn't been active for decades, scientists and engineers began working around the clock. The weapons they were building had been designed during humanity's darkest days, when humans fought humans and nearly destroyed themselves. They were terrible weapons made by a species that understood war too well. The Valtre thought they knew humanity. They thought humans were weak, peace-loving traitors who would collapse at the first sign of real violence. They were about to learn a very hard lesson. Humanity didn't start fights, but when forced to fight, humanity finished them. Completely and without mercy. The Valtre had awakened something that had been sleeping for a century. 2 weeks after the attacks, General Stephen Price walked into the Colonial Defense Headquarters and accepted his new position as Supreme Commander of Human Forces. He was a short man with cold eyes and a reputation for winning battles that should have been lost. During the Unity Wars, he had commanded the defense of Europa when rebel forces tried to take the moon. They outnumbered his forces 5-1. He still won. "The Council has given you complete authority," Admiral Henderson said, handing over the command codes. "Whatever you need, you get. No questions asked." "I'll need everything," Stephen replied. "And I'll need it fast." The transformation of human space began immediately. Every shipyard went to full production. Factories that made consumer goods were converted to military manufacturing. Mining operations doubled their output. Civilian transport ships were retrofitted with weapons and armor. On Earth alone, 3 million people volunteered for military service in the first week. The training facilities couldn't handle them all. New bases were built in a matter of days, thrown together by work crews operating around the clock. Dr. Alan Foster stood in the main laboratory of the Advanced Weapons Division and looked at the device on the table before him. It was small, barely the size of a briefcase, but it contained enough destructive power to crack a planet's crust. "How many can we produce?" General Price asked, standing beside him. "We can make 20 in the first month, 50 by month 3. After that, limited only by raw materials. Make 100. I want options." Alan hesitated. "Stephen, these weapons are designed to kill everything on a planet. Not just military targets, everything." "Good, that's exactly what we need. The Valtre have over 200 worlds. We can't hit them all." "We don't need to hit them all," Stephen said. "We just need to hit enough that they understand we mean business." In orbit around Earth, the shipyards worked without stopping. The sound of construction echoed through the vacuum, carried by the vibrations of metal being welded and ships being assembled. The fleet that was taking shape was unlike anything humanity had built before. The old doctrine had been exploration and defense. Small, fast ships designed for patrol and trade protection. That doctrine was dead now. The new ships were built for one purpose only: war. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his new command and tried not to think about how different it was from the horizon. The Earth defense ship Vengeance was 3 times larger, with enough firepower to level a city from orbit. Its armor was thick enough to withstand sustained bombardment, and its weapon systems were state-of-the-art. "She's a beast," Commander Kate Sullivan said, running her hands over the tactical console. "I've never seen this much firepower on a single ship." "There are 50 more just like her being built," Jake replied. "And another 100 smaller warships. The fleet is going to be massive." Lisa Grant had traded her civilian clothes for a military uniform. She looked uncomfortable in it, but she wore it anyway. Her new role was chief strategist for Admiral Henderson's task force. She studied Valtre tactics and culture, looking for weaknesses humanity could exploit. "They fight in rigid formations," she explained during a briefing. "They rely on numerical superiority and overwhelming force. They don't adapt well to unexpected tactics. So we hit them with everything they don't expect," General Price said. "Fast strikes, irregular patterns, weapons they've never seen before." "Exactly. But there's something else." Lisa pulled up a star map showing Valtrek territory. "Their empire is old and spread out. They have 200 worlds, but they're not all important. If we identify their key systems and hit those, we can cripple their ability to wage war." Karen White, an intelligence officer who had been monitoring Valtrek communications, added her own findings. "They're not expecting serious resistance. Their military chatter suggests they think we'll surrender any day now. They've already started dividing up our colonies among their commanders." "Let them think that," Stephen said. "The longer they stay confident, the harder they'll fall." 6 months passed. To the outside galaxy, it looked like humanity was dying. There were no military movements from human space. No threats or declarations. Just silence. The Valtrek interpreted this as weakness. Commander Zekthor, promoted to High War Master after his successful campaign, began planning the invasion of Earth itself. He believed it would be easy. The humans were broken, their will to fight gone. All that remained was the final blow. He had no idea what was actually happening in human space. Every day, more ships joined the fleet. Every day, more soldiers completed their training. Every day, new weapons came online. Humanity was preparing for the largest military operation in its history, and they were doing it in complete radio silence. Lieutenant Chris Bailey recovered from his injuries and requested combat duty. They made him a squadron leader, giving him command of 12 fighters and pilots who were just as angry as he was. They called themselves Ghost Squadron, and they trained harder than anyone else. "We're going back," Chris told his pilots. "Back to New Portland. Back to all the colonies they took from us, and we're going to make them pay for every single life they took." His pilots cheered. They had all lost someone in the attacks. Family, friends, lovers. The Valtrek had given them all a reason to fight. The training was brutal. General Price pushed everyone to their limits and then beyond. He didn't want soldiers who could follow orders. He wanted soldiers who could win against impossible odds. "The Valtrek think they know war," he told a group of new recruits. "They've conquered dozens of species over the centuries, but they've never fought humans. They've never fought a species that..." remembers what total war really means. Admiral Henderson assembled his command staff in the war room and unveiled Operation Righteous Fury. The plan was simple in concept but massive in scope. 3 main fleets would strike into Valtre space simultaneously, hitting different sectors. Smaller strike groups would target supply lines and communication hubs, and the new weapons would be deployed against military strongholds. "We're not trying to occupy their worlds," Paul explained. "We're trying to break their ability to make war. We hit them so hard and so fast that they can't respond effectively." "What about civilian casualties?" one of the officers asked. Paul's expression hardened. "We'll avoid civilian targets when possible. But make no mistake, this is total war. They started it by killing 8 million of our civilians. We're going to finish it." Jake Morrison received his orders personally from Admiral Henderson. "You and the Vengeance will lead Strike Group 7. Your target is the Valtre Forward Command Station in the Kelros sector. Take it out, and their entire offensive capability in that region collapses." "Understood, sir." "Jake, this isn't going to be like our diplomatic missions. This is war, real war. People are going to die. A lot of people." "I know, sir. I watched the footage from New Portland. I know exactly what kind of war this is." The day before deployment, General Price addressed the entire fleet via live broadcast. Over 3,000 ships carrying 500,000 soldiers and crew prepared to jump into Valtre space. "They thought we were weak," Stephen said, his voice carrying to every ship in the fleet. "They thought we would surrender. They thought wrong. We didn't start this war. We tried peace. We offered friendship. They answered with genocide. So now we show them what humanity really is. We show them what happens when you murder our children and laugh about it. We show them why you should never ever make humans angry." The fleet erupted in cheers. On Earth, billions watched and waited. The Valtre had taken 12 colonies. Now humanity would take their payment in blood. In the outer colonies, the few survivors who had managed to stay hidden watched the skies and hoped. They had heard rumors of a fleet being assembled, but they didn't know if it was true. They had survived 6 months of Valtre occupation, living like animals, always hiding, always afraid. One group of survivors on New Portland lived in the tunnels beneath the old capital city. They numbered 200 people, including Chris Bailey's girlfriend Sarah, who had somehow survived the initial bombardment. They had lost contact with Earth months ago and assumed the worst. "Maybe Earth surrendered," one survivor said. "Maybe the war is over?" "No," Sarah replied, looking at the ruined city above through a crack in the tunnel ceiling. "If Earth had surrendered, the Valtre wouldn't still be here. They're waiting for something. Maybe they're waiting for the fleet." "What fleet? We have 12 patrol ships. That's not enough to fight the Valtre. You don't know humans very well, do you?" Sarah smiled for the first time in months. "We're stubborn. When you hurt us, we don't lie down and die. We get back up and hit you twice as hard." She didn't know how right she was. In deep space, beyond sensor range of any Valtre outpost, the human fleet gathered. 3,000 warships carrying weapons the galaxy hadn't seen in a century. Weapons designed by humans for use against humans during the darkest period of their history. The Valtre were about to learn why humanity had banned these weapons. Not because they didn't work, but because they worked too well. Admiral Henderson stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the tactical display. Every ship was in position. Every weapon was armed. Every soldier was ready. "All ships report ready for jump," his communications officer reported. "Then let's begin," Paul said. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kelros sector, and for a moment there was only silence. Then every ship activated its weapon systems at once, and space lit up with the glow of charging energy. Captain Jake Morrison watched the tactical display on the Vengeance's bridge as the Valtre Forward Command Station came into view. It was massive, easily 5 times the size of Earth's largest space station. Around it, a defense fleet of 60 warships moved into defensive positions. "They're hailing us," Kate Sullivan reported. "Audio only." "Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was harsh and clicking, barely understandable through the translator. "Human ships, you are in violation of Valtre space. Retreat immediately or you will be destroyed." Jake didn't hesitate. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Ship Vengeance. You attacked our colonies without warning. You killed 8 million civilians. You declared war on humanity. Now we're here to finish what you started. Last chance to surrender." There was a pause, then laughter. Actual laughter from the Valtre commander. Your fleet is small. Ours is larger. You will die here, human. We'll see about that, Jake said, cutting the channel. He turned to Kate. All ships, weapons free. Take them apart. The battle began with a coordinated strike that the Valtre weren't prepared for. Human ships didn't move in the rigid formations that most species used. They scattered, darting between enemy vessels like hunting birds, firing from unexpected angles. The Valtre had superior numbers, but the humans had superior tactics. And more importantly, they had weapons the Valtre had never encountered before. The Vengeance fired its main cannon, and the beam that shot out was unlike anything in conventional warfare. It punched through the shields of a Valtre cruiser like they weren't even there, cutting the ship in half. Secondary explosions rippled along the wreckage as atmosphere vented into space. Direct hit, Kate reported. Target destroyed. Next target. Keep firing. All across the battlefield, human weapons proved devastatingly effective. The Valtre had built their technology assuming certain physical laws and limitations. Humanity had found ways around those limitations during the Unity Wars, and they had kept those secrets ever since. In another sector, Admiral Paul Henderson's main fleet engaged a Valtre battle group, defending one of their major supply hubs. The Valtre commander had positioned his ships in a standard defensive sphere, a formation that had worked against dozens of other species. It didn't work against humans. Split the fleet into 3 groups, Paul ordered. Alpha group attack from above. Beta group go low. Charlie group hold position and draw their fire. The Valtre commander watched in confusion as the human ships ignored basic tactical doctrine and scattered in multiple directions. He ordered his ships to maintain formation, confident that discipline would win the day. He was wrong. The human ships attacked from 3 directions at once, focusing fire on specific points in the defensive sphere. The formation collapsed within 20 minutes and the supply hub was left defenseless. Destroy the hub, Paul ordered. Leave nothing operational. The massive supply station, which had served as a major logistics center for Valtre military operations, was reduced to scrap metal in under an hour. Thousands of tons of weapons, ammunition, and supplies were destroyed. The Valtre forces in that entire sector would soon run out of everything they needed to fight. Lieutenant Chris Bailey led Ghost Squadron through the debris field around New Portland. His mission was to provide cover for the ground forces being sent to evacuate survivors. But first, they had to deal with the Valtre fighters that still patrolled the colony. All Ghost units, this is Ghost Leader. We go in fast, hit hard, and don't stop moving. These are the same forces that killed our people. Make them pay. His squadron dove toward the planet, and the Valtre fighters rose to meet them. The dogfight was fierce but short. Human fighters were faster and more maneuverable, and the pilots were fighting for revenge. Within 30 minutes, the sky above New Portland was clear. Chris landed his fighter near the ruins of the old capital city and climbed out. The air was still toxic from the biological weapons, so he kept his helmet sealed. A group of soldiers moved past him, heading for the tunnel systems where survivors might be hiding. Bailey, is that you? Chris turned and saw Sarah emerging from a tunnel entrance, supported by 2 soldiers. She was thin and dirty, but alive. He ran to her, pulling her into a hug. I thought you were dead, he said. I thought everyone was dead, she replied, tears streaming down her face. But you came back. You all came back. We're taking back every colony they took from us, Chris said. Every single one. Back in space, the battle for the forward command station was reaching its conclusion. The Valtre defense fleet was down to 20 ships and they were losing ground fast. The station itself was taking heavy fire from multiple human vessels. Jake Morrison watched as the station's shields finally collapsed under sustained bombardment. Target their main reactor. End this. The Vengeance's main cannon fired one more time and the beam struck the station's power core. The explosion was visible for light years, a brief new star that marked the end of Valtre offensive capability in the entire sector. Station destroyed, Kate reported. Enemy fleet is retreating. Let them go, Jake said. I want them to tell their commanders what happened here. The first Retribution fleet, as Admiral Henderson's force had been named, continued its advance into Valtre space. System after system fell to the human assault. The Valtre tried to adapt, but they couldn't match human tactics or technology. General Stephen Price, coordinating the overall campaign from Earth, received reports from all fronts. Every engagement was a victory. The Valtre were being pushed back across their entire territory. "They're requesting a meeting," Karen White reported. "The Valtre High Council wants to negotiate." "Tell them no," Stephen replied without hesitation. They had their chance for diplomacy. They chose genocide instead. Now they get war. The Valtrek tried to reinforce their remaining strongholds, pulling ships from their frontier regions. It was exactly what the human strategists had predicted. With the Valtrek forces concentrated in defensive positions, the smaller human strike groups moved in to capture outlying territories. Dr. Lisa Grant, serving as Admiral Henderson's chief strategist, identified the next target. Curzon Prime. It's their secondary military headquarters and a major shipyard. If we take it, they lose most of their ability to build new ships. How heavily defended? Paul asked. Very. Current intelligence suggests at least 300 ships and extensive orbital defenses. Then we'll bring 600 ships. I'm not taking chances. The Battle of Curzon Prime lasted 3 days. It was the largest single engagement of the war and one of the bloodiest. The Valtrek fought with desperation, knowing that losing this system would cripple their military. They lost anyway. Human ships swarmed the orbital defenses, using coordinated strikes to overwhelm individual platforms. The Valtrek fleet tried to maintain a defensive perimeter, but human forces kept finding gaps in their formation. Every time the Valtrek closed a gap, another opened somewhere else. On the second day, the human fleet deployed the weapon everyone had been afraid to use. Dr. Alan Foster had called it a planetary cracker, though that wasn't quite accurate. It didn't crack planets. It destabilized them from the inside, causing massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that made the surface uninhabitable. The weapon wasn't used on Curzon Prime itself. Instead, it was deployed against one of the system's moons, which housed a major military production facility. The moon shook itself apart over the course of 6 hours, and when it was over, the facility was gone and the moon was nothing but a field of asteroids. The Valtrek fleet watched it happen and realized they were facing an enemy that had been holding back. These weren't the peaceful traders they had met months ago. These were warriors who had built weapons of mass destruction and then voluntarily put them away because they preferred peace. The Valtrek had forced humanity to bring those weapons back out. That was their mistake. On the third day, the Valtrek fleet broke and ran. The remaining ships jumped to hyperspace, abandoning Curzon Prime to the human forces. The orbital shipyards were captured intact, along with dozens of ships still under construction. Admiral Henderson stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the captured system with satisfaction. "Send a message to all human forces. Curzon Prime is ours. The next phase of the operation begins now." That phase involved hunting down the Valtrek High Command. Intelligence had located High War Master Zekthor on a fortified world in the core territories. He was the one who had planned the attack on human colonies. He was the one who had laughed while New Portland burned. Jake Morrison volunteered to lead the strike team. He met with me on Epsilon 9. He looked me in the eye and lied about wanting peace. "I want to be there when we bring him in." "He won't surrender easily," Paul warned. "I'm not asking him to surrender. I'm telling him he's going to face justice for what he did." The raid on Zekthor's command post was swift and brutal. Human Marines, trained for zero-gravity combat and equipped with the latest armor, stormed the facility before the Valtrek could mount an effective defense. They found Zekthor in his command center. 1 year after the Valtrek attacked New Portland, General Stephen Price stood on the bridge of the flagship Retribution and watched the last Valtrek military stronghold surrender. The war was over. Humanity had won, but the cost had been terrible. 8 million civilians dead in the initial attacks. Another 200,000 soldiers killed during the counteroffensive. 12 colonies scarred by biological weapons. Dozens of ships destroyed in battle. The price of victory was measured in blood and grief. The Valtrek had paid an even higher price. Their military was completely destroyed. Their leadership was either dead or awaiting trial for war crimes. 12 of their worlds bore the marks of human weapons, serving as permanent reminders of what happened when you made humans angry. Their empire, which had lasted for thousands of years, was gone. Captain Jake Morrison walked through the ruins of New Portland wearing a sealed environment suit. The biological weapons had been neutralized months ago, but the planet would never be the same. The cities were still destroyed, and it would take decades to rebuild. He stood at the memorial that had been erected in the center of what used to be the capital. 8 million names were carved into black stone, arranged in columns that stretched higher than he could see. Governor Amy Peterson's name was there, along with the names of everyone else who had died that day. "We won," Jake said quietly to no one in particular. "But it doesn't feel like winning." Lisa Grant stood beside him, also wearing an environment suit. She had come to see New Portland for herself, to understand what the Valtre had done. Winning and healing are two different things. "The war is over, but the recovery will take years. Was it worth it?" Jake asked. "All the destruction, all the death. Was revenge worth the price?" "It wasn't revenge," Lisa said. "It was justice. There's a difference. The Valtre committed genocide. They murdered 8 million people and laughed about it. What we did was make sure they could never do it again to anyone." In orbit above New Portland, construction crews were working to build a new space station. The colony would be rebuilt slowly but surely. Survivors who had hidden in tunnels and bunkers were already returning to the surface, ready to start over. Humanity was resilient. They always had been. Chris Bailey and Sarah stood together watching the reconstruction efforts from a viewing platform. They had gotten married 3 months ago, deciding not to wait any longer. Life was too short, and the war had taught them that tomorrow was never guaranteed. "Are you going to stay in the military?" Sarah asked. Chris shook his head. "I did what I needed to do. Now I want to help rebuild. The colony needs pilots for the transport runs, and I'm tired of shooting at things." "Good. I'm tired of worrying about you getting shot." On Earth, the War Crimes Tribunal began its work. High War Master Zekthor and 43 other Valtrek commanders stood before a panel of judges representing humanity and several other galactic species. The evidence presented was overwhelming. Video footage of the attacks, testimony from survivors, records showing the Valtrek had planned the genocide months in advance. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The verdict was unanimous. All 44 Valtrek commanders were found guilty of crimes against sentient life. The sentence was execution, not out of revenge, but because they were too dangerous to be allowed to live. Species who committed genocide didn't deserve second chances. Senator Daniel Brooks addressed the tribunal after the sentencing. "Let this be a lesson to the galaxy. Humanity tried peace. We offered friendship. When that was rejected with violence and murder, we responded with overwhelming force. We don't want war. We never wanted war, but we will not allow genocide to go unpunished. Any species that attacks civilians, that targets children, that uses weapons of mass destruction against defenseless populations will face the same fate as the Valtrek." The galaxy was listening. Reports of the human military campaign had spread across all civilized space. Species that had previously dismissed humanity as weak traitors now viewed them with a mixture of respect and fear. Admiral Paul Henderson received diplomatic messages from over 50 different species. In the weeks following the trial, they all said essentially the same thing. "We acknowledge humanity's right to defend itself. We will not interfere in your affairs. We hope to maintain peaceful relations." Some messages were more honest. The Draxi ambassador wrote, "We had no idea you were capable of such destruction. We are grateful we never gave you reason to demonstrate it against us." Dr. Alan Foster dismantled the last of the Planet Cracker weapons in a secure facility. The work was careful and methodical. These weapons had served their purpose, but now they needed to be put away again. "Hopefully forever. Do you think we'll ever need them again?" his assistant asked. Alan shook his head. "I hope not. But we're keeping the designs, just in case. The galaxy has learned that humanity can be pushed too far. With luck, no one will ever test those limits again." General Stephen Price retired from military service 6 months after the war ended. He had done his duty and led humanity to victory, but the weight of command had taken its toll. He was tired of making decisions that ended lives, even enemy lives. At his retirement ceremony, he spoke to the assembled officers and soldiers. "We fought a war we didn't want against an enemy we tried to befriend. We won because we were willing to do whatever was necessary to protect our people. But winning came at a terrible cost. Don't forget that cost. Don't forget the 8 million civilians who died because the Valtrek thought we were weak. And don't forget that strength without restraint is just cruelty. We used terrible weapons because we had no choice. Pray we never have to make that choice again." The remaining Valtrek population was placed under human oversight. They were given their own worlds to govern, but their military capability was permanently reduced. They would never again pose a threat to anyone. Human observers made sure of that. Some argued that humanity was being too harsh, that the Valtre had learned their lesson and should be given more freedom. But the memory of New Portland was too fresh. 8 million dead was not something that could be forgiven or forgotten in a single generation. Jake Morrison was given command of a new diplomatic vessel, tasked with rebuilding relationships with the other species of the galaxy. His first mission was to visit the species humanity had previously traded with and reassure them that humans were still interested in peace. The meetings were awkward at first. The other species looked at Jake and his crew with new eyes, seeing warriors instead of traitors. But slowly, trust began to rebuild. Humanity made it clear, we prefer peace, but we will not be victimized. Attack us and we will respond with everything we have. Kate Sullivan stayed in the military, rising to the rank of admiral. She oversaw the permanent defense fleet that now protected every human colony. Never again would humanity be caught unprepared. Never again would colonies be left defenseless. Lisa Grant returned to civilian life and wrote a book about the war. It was titled The Price of Peace and became required reading at every military academy. In it, she argued that humanity's preference for peace was not weakness but a choice that could be unmade when necessary. The Valtre made a fundamental error, she wrote. They assumed that because we chose peace we were incapable of war. They thought our restraint meant we lacked strength. They were wrong. Humanity has always been capable of terrible violence. We simply choose not to use it unless absolutely necessary. The Valtre forced that choice. They paid for that mistake with their empire. 5 years after the war, the rebuilt New Portland held its first harvest festival since the attack. The new capital was smaller than the old one, but it was growing. Fields that had been poisoned were clean again. Buildings rose from the ruins. Life continued. Chris Bailey flew his transport ship over the colony and smiled. His daughter, born 3 years ago, sat in the co-pilot seat beside him. She was too young to fly the ship, but she loved watching the controls light up. "Daddy, what are those?" she asked, pointing at the memorial stones visible from the air. "Those are reminders," Chris said. "Reminders of people who died and why we must never forget them." Were they brave? Some of them were. Others were just ordinary people, who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. But we remember them all. On Earth, in a secure archive deep beneath the surface, the complete record of the war was stored. Every battle, every weapon deployment, every casualty report. Future generations would be able to see exactly what had happened and why. Among those records was a single video file labeled, "For Future Commanders." General Price had recorded it before his retirement. In it, he looked directly at the camera and spoke to leaders who had not yet been born. If you're watching this, it means humanity is facing another existential threat. You're looking for guidance, for permission to use the weapons we used against the Valtre. Here's what I want you to know. War is horror. It's death and destruction and grief that never ends. We won our war, but the scars remain. We turned Valtre worlds to ash, and we will carry that burden forever. So before you make the same choice we did, ask yourself, have we truly exhausted every other option? Is this really the only way? Because once you cross that line, once you become the thing that burns worlds, you can never go back. Make sure it's worth it. Admiral Henderson,